Good afternoon, everybody. We continue our odyssey. I hope people did well in the last Kahoot contest. It certainly was fun. We'll be glad to see who emerges from that momentarily. But now we're continuing the odyssey of the day, and that is to imagine all the aspects of campaigns and elections and what it means to be responsible citizens. And even as we've heard about the 19th Amendment, we heard about the Electoral College, we've heard about polling, it's important as you imagine yourselves getting involved in the process to think about what are campaigns all about? How does one run a campaign? Whom does one engage in order to run a campaign? And how are they successful or unsuccessful? We've gathered three friends of the school to talk about these issues and others, and I'm so grateful to them for being here today. First, Marie St. Fleur. Marie St. Fleur was appointed by Mayor Menino in 2010 as the Chief of Advocacy and Strategic Investment for the City of Boston. A former Massachusetts State Representative, Ms. St. Fleur was first elected to serve in the Massachusetts House of Representatives in 1999, becoming the first Haitian American elected to state office in the United States. As the House Chair of the Joint Committee on Education, Arts, and Humanities, Representative St. Fleur championed two-way bilingual education and alternative education, and she led the establishment of the Massachusetts Board and Department of Early Education and Care. A former Assistant State Attorney General and Assistant DA, Ms. St. Fleur has experience protecting underserved communities in the areas of criminal justice, human services, and civil rights. A graduate of UMass Amherst, Representative St. Fleur earned her law degree at Boston College. She served as chair of the Advisory Council for the Haiti Fund at the Boston Foundation, was a former trustee of the Boston Bar Foundation, and is past president of the Massachusetts Black Lawyers Association. Today, Ms. St. Fleur runs her own communications consulting firm and serves on the board of directors of the Dorchester Boys and Girls Club and of Nativity Prep. Mr. Steve Grossman. Steve Grossman was elected treasurer of Massachusetts in 2010 and served in that position until 2015. One of his principal achievements in that office was the creation of the Small Business Banking Partnership, focused on helping businesses owned by women, minorities, immigrants, and veterans. He was a candidate for governor in 2002 and again in 2014. Prior to taking office, Mr. Grossman served for 35 years as president of Grossman Marketing Group. Mr. Grossman has been an active leader in many civic, philanthropic, and political organizations, including as former board chair of Brandeis University, former national chairman of the Democratic National Committee, and former president of the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. Today, Mr. Grossman is the CEO of ICIC, an organization based in Roxbury's Nubian Square, focused on achieving economic prosperity in America's inner cities. Mr. Grossman graduated from Princeton and Harvard Business School. He is also incidentally the grandfather of Will Grossman in Class 3. Finally, Dennis Cannon. Dennis Cannon, class of 1964, is a beloved son of RL, having committed much of his time and talent to the school long after his years as a student. Mr. Cannon serves on the Board of Trustees for 18 years, 9 as president. In January, as part of our 375th celebration of trustees, we unveiled Mr. Cannon's portrait, which now hangs in the main hallway by the nurse's office. He and his wife, Carol, the parents of 3 alumni, have served over the years in a variety of volunteer and leadership positions. Mr. Cannon is principal and co-founder of New Boston Ventures, a real estate development company in Boston. Prior to this, he was a partner in the law firm of Foley Hoag. Mr. Cannon has been active in government and politics over many decades, starting when he was a student at RL. He served as campaign manager for the House, Senate, and presidential campaigns of former U.S. Senator Paul Tsongas, and served as Mr. Tsongas's chief of staff in the U.S. Senate and U.S. House of Representatives. Mr. Cannon was a member of both the National Democratic Party Commission on Platform Accountability and Charter Commission. He's also been active in community and civic organizations, serving in leadership roles for the Massachusetts Finance Agency, the Anti-Defamation League, the Epiphany School, the Children's Hospitals Advocacy Campaign Advisory Group, and the Massachusetts League of Environmental Voters. Mr. Cannon graduated from Harvard College and Harvard Law School. And I thought now it would be great to hear from each of you, starting with Ms. St. Fleur, going to Mr. Grossman, and then Mr. Cannon. And just if you could say a little bit about your experience, especially that which I didn't cover in your introductions.
Well, I'm really delighted. Thank you, Mr. Brennan, for allowing me to have the opportunity to speak with your school community. I think that learning how our democracy work is one of the most important thing that we can start to take time out to do. Not simply today because we're in election cycle, but every day. Because without our understanding and embracing the values of our democracy, then it can't be sustained. And we see that we're in a very precarious place in our history right now. And so it just gives me a great pleasure to be with you. And I thank Dennis, who I've come to know, and Steve Grossman. Anyway, they've been in many parts of my journey. They've shown up. And so it's wonderful to be there with you. I think all I can share with you is I'm a kid from Upham's Corner. I always start with that. When I was elected, I thought it was very important that I share that. I want you to know that I was born under a dictator. His name was Duvalier. And that in 1962, when I was born, shortly thereafter, my parents had to leave us. And they had to leave us because they threatened to kill my dad, because my dad refused to obey an order to go worship Duvalier at the Capitol in Haiti. And he refused to send his workers to put them on trucks so that they can go outside of their where they lived and go to the city, the main capital, in order to I say worship, because you go there in order to celebrate a dictator who was killing most of your family. So by the time I left Haiti in 1969, most of the folks who between my family members, between my dad and myself, those generations had been killed. And so they thought it was important to get us out of the country. So that's the context in which I entered into the United States. And when I entered into the United States, then I entered into New Jersey. At the time, Asbury Park, New Jersey. My parents were Catholic, and they thought, well, we're just going to put them in Catholic schools. But guess what? In 1968, 69 in New Jersey, a Black kid showing up, even with the name St. Fleur, was not invited to participate in Catholic schools. I was allowed to accept the sacrament. I remember that because I was to accept the sacrament. Because Holy Communion at the time you could receive when you were 6 and 7 years old. You began preparation and you received your first communion when you were 7. And my parents were told, though we couldn't go to school there. We were 3 girls at the time, and I was the oldest. And that set me on the journey that led me 6 months later to the city of Boston, because my parents had friends in the city of Boston who said, oh, wait a minute. Oh, Boston, you can come and go to school. You can go to Catholic school. And it should be fun. And my mother, to this day, still says her rosaries. And so it's really an important part of her life. And she insisted that we all pack up and show up in Boston. So we showed up in Boston. I was enrolled at St. Patrick's in Roxbury and started my education in St. Patrick's in Roxbury. Those experiences shaped who I am today more than anything. So being uprooted, coming into your new country and finding that you were not always welcome, but always finding allies. And that was more important because it was an ally that got us to Dorchester. And it was an ally that allowed us to be able to enroll in at St. Patrick's. And it was always an ally that continued to support, drive, and help you understand that the dreams that you have, that you can continue to pursue, and there'll be allies there to support you along the way. And so when I sit here today and I see what's happening in the country, I am deeply concerned. But I also know that there are allies across this state and across this country who believe in the promise of America, because that's what many of us immigrants come for. It is the promise of America. It is the belief that no matter where you come from, that there is a space, there's opportunity for you to pull yourself up with the support of others, because nobody does it alone. And so that is really what I wanted to share. And I am in love with Upham's Corner because the community in Upham's Corner embraced this 7-year-old girl whose English was not her first language, who had been uprooted from a home where she was loved and everybody knew her family from generations, okay? Because my grandfather, my great-grandfather, they fought in wars to liberate us. And that they knew us in this town, to a place that nobody really knew and understood me. And they embraced me, and in that way got me involved in so many of the things that I now take for granted. And that is the opportunity to speak on behalf of others who may not be able to speak for themselves, the opportunity to sit at tables to represent folks, Dorchester, Roxbury, Mattapan, who may not have the opportunity to sit at those tables, and to be able to drive policy and change to make certain that we can level that playing field so that everybody can get those ambassadors, that allies that help them get to where we need to get. So I'm delighted to be here to continue this conversation with you.
Thank you, Ms. St. Fleur. Mr. Grossman.
Thank you, Marie. When I hear you share as eloquently as you just did your sense of mission, vision, and values, I am grateful all over again for the opportunity that Barbara and I had to support you every step of the way in your political career. You've been an exemplary citizen in the best sense of the word, and I'm proud to be with you here this afternoon. The most important conversation I've ever had in my life was one I had with my grandfather in February of 1963. I had just turned 17. I was a senior at Exeter. I didn't have the privilege of going to Roxbury Latin. My grandfather called me one day, said, "I'd like to come up to Exeter and take you to lunch." My grandfather was an immigrant, came to this country from the Russian-Romanian border in 1900, his family fleeing the pogroms in those days. He was the second youngest of 13 children, lived in East Boston. He pulled himself up by his bootstraps and made a lot of himself, started a business, got involved in politics, served many, many governors and mayors. But he had a mission that day when he came to Exeter. He said, "Steve," he said, "there were only 4 things I ever wanted to do with my life." I said, "What were they, Uncle Max?" He never wanted to be called Grandpa. He said, "I'm not old enough to be Grandpa." He was Uncle Max. He said, "Steve, I wanted to have a healthy family. I wanted to educate my kids. I wanted to start my own business so I'd never have to rely on anybody else for my livelihood. And I wanted to give something back to the community that had thrown me a lifeline when I needed it." And he chose politics for that. His first experience in politics was when he was a teenager. A bunch of people in the East Boston Political Club one day said, "Max, we're going to hand out leaflets for Honey Fitz, who's running for re-election as mayor of Boston." Honey Fitz was President John Kennedy's grandfather. And he did that. And that created a lifelong interest and love for grassroots politics. Family, education, economic opportunity, and building strong, vibrant communities. Those were the principles that he taught me that day at age 17. And those are the principles that have guided my life ever since. As meaningful as serving as chairman of the Massachusetts Democratic Party and the Democratic National Committee were, serving in elective office was something I always wanted to do. I'm old-fashioned. When the people give you their vote, one of the most precious things they have to offer, when they vote for you and say, "We want you to serve as our leader in some office," whether it's state representative, treasurer, governor, or president of the United States, and allow you to serve, that's empowering. I always saw it that way, which is why I ran first in 2002 for governor. People have asked me sometimes, what's the biggest mistake you ever made in politics, and what's the most important lesson you learned? And to some extent, they're the same. I learned, as my father once said to me, that we were all born with one mouth and 2 ears, and we should use them in that proportion. We should listen about twice as much as we talk. When I ran for governor the first time, I used to walk into rooms and I would tell everybody everything I knew about every conceivable topic on the planet. It didn't matter whether they were interested or not. I just was intent upon showing them how smart I was. I realized later on that what people want to know and they want you to hear their story. So when I ran for treasurer 8 years later, I used to walk into rooms and I'd walk up to somebody and say, "Hi, I'm Steve Grossman. What's your name?" Person would say, "My name is Kerry Brennan." I'd say, "Kerry, tell me about yourself." And Kerry might say, "Well, there's not that much to tell." I said, "Kerry, I bet there is. Tell me about yourself." When you say that a second time to people, they open up and they tell you their story. Be a good listener. It's a great skill, whether it's in the classroom or in running for office. So I'd like to share in the minute or two that I have left 4 pieces of advice. First, always be self-reflective. When Charlie Baker, the current governor of Massachusetts, ran the first time for governor, he lost badly. And when he sat down with his wife and his advisors after the fact, they said, Charlie, you weren't yourself. You weren't authentic. You ran a terrible race. Be yourself the next time you run. He was himself the next time he ran. He's won twice for governor, and he has been an exemplary governor because he learned to be self-reflective and to change. Number 2, each of you, every one of you has unique talents and skills. And if you want to get involved in politics, in a campaign, you're going to be immensely valuable to the candidate of your choice. Number 3, always start at the grassroots level to learn politics from the ground up. It's important to go door to door when the pandemic is over, to be sure, and learn politics by talking to real people who sit around real kitchen tables and worry about the mortgage and the car payment and all the rest of the challenges in their lives that they faced. And finally, always work for candidates you believe in and who excite your passion, even if they're underdogs. One of my favorite quotes, and I'll end with this, is a quote from Oliver Wendell Holmes, who once said that life is action and passion. He said, I think it's required of a person to be part of the action and passion of their times at peril of being judged, never to have lived at all. Oliver Holmes had it right. It's all about passion. Be passionate about your candidates, be passionate about your values and about their beliefs and yours. And you will have wonderful, wonderful experiences being involved in politics. Thanks so much for listening.
Thanks, Mr. Grossman. Mr. Cannon.
Well, it's pretty tough to follow Marie St. Fleur and Steve Grossman. So, but I'll tell you a little bit about my political odyssey. I got the political bug when I was still in high school. When I was 14, I was going door to door, as Steve Grossman said, and getting signatures from people for political candidates and then giving out literature for them. In my hometown of Norwood, I wanted to get more people doing what I was doing. So I started an organization called Democratic American Teenage Enterprises. Notice the acronym was DATES. So I got a lot of people to join. And at Roxbury Latin, we had a class, Carrie Brennan knows this, a class called SHOP, which is woodworking. And I'd spend half my time making a checkerboard and the other half taking polls of the kids in my class on political issues. So Mr. Jorgensen, who was our class master, gave me an A the first semester. We had 6 semesters then. Gave me an A the first semester, B the second, C the third, D the fourth. I think you get the idea. So anyway, I also started something, I don't remember if it was my junior year or senior, but I started something called the Great Issues Club. And I brought speakers to the school to talk about civil rights, Peace Corps, other issues that were current at that time. And we did not have halls then like you have now. You are so lucky, by the way, to have as many halls and the breadth of halls as you have. We didn't have them. But the headmaster at the time, Mr. Weed, did encourage me in terms of bringing these speakers. So it's a great experience. After my graduation from RL and before my first year of college, I got a job at the Democratic National Committee. That was the year that Lyndon Johnson was running for election, 1964. It was a great experience. I met him, I met Bobby Kennedy, pretty heady stuff for an 18-year-old. And then I worked at the National Convention that year. So it was terrific. Less than a year later, I was back in Washington at the first anti-war march against the war in Vietnam and against Lyndon Johnson. And during my college career, that really was a large part of what I did, other than take classes, of course, which was become part of the anti-war movement. And I was elected chair of the College Young Democrats of Massachusetts, and we became the first official Democratic organization to endorse Gene McCarthy, who was a senator from Minnesota, against the war, against Lyndon Johnson, whom I'd worked for 4 years earlier. Actually, the state party tried to throw us out of the out of the Democratic Party. But then when Bobby Kennedy got in the race, they changed their minds. Anyway, in law school, aside from classes, became the director of the Vietnam Moratorium. And we tried to turn the pro-war Massachusetts congressional delegation to become against the war. And actually, we were very successful. And then in law school, after law school, I went to a public interest law firm and then got a job in Washington as a legislative assistant. Came back to run Paul Tsongas's campaign, as Carrie said, for Congress. I later would run Senate and presidential campaign and work in a number of presidentials, actually. But that was my best political experience because we started with nothing in that campaign and nobody thought we could win. And we did, obviously, by basically running a guerrilla warfare kind of campaign. Then I was chief of staff for Paul, both in the House and Senate. It was the best job I ever had because I really felt I was making a difference for people. We passed a lot of legislation that changed people's lives. And then in 1980, I took off 9 months to work on Ted Kennedy's campaign, traveled around the country. He was running for president. Senator Ted Kennedy was running for president of the United States. And I had a group of 30 people working under me. We traveled from state to state. And that was a great experience as well, because I got to see other parts of the country and see how people felt in other parts of the country. Very different than in Massachusetts. So 1992, ran Paul's presidential campaign, which we talked about, which Carrie talked about. Paul Tsongas emerged as the chief contender for the Democratic nomination against Bill Clinton. From starting out as 6th out of 6 in the pundit polls of the time. So since then, I've worked and provided strategic advice to different candidates, including candidates for governor like Steve Grossman and treasurer like Steve Grossman, and other candidates. But it's been a great time. I've loved almost every minute of it. And just happy to be here and talking to students at my alma mater.
Thank you, Mr. Cannon. We're going to run through a series of questions now. I'll pitch them to each of you individually, and I look forward to your answers. Could we stay with you, Dennis, for a moment? Could you talk a little bit about what the challenges are of running a campaign?
Sure. There are a number of challenges. I would say the first one is building a team of talented people who are willing to think outside the box, who are quick learners. They don't all have to be people with experience, but it's good to have some people with campaign experience. But a team is a talented, strong team that's willing to take risks, I think is very important. Second challenge is building a plan that lays out a campaign from beginning to election day, right from the start. Lays out what you want to do in terms of raising money, what this candidate's schedule will be, what the issues development will be, all of that, everything, every aspect of a campaign, and then a budget as well, because a budget has to match what you're planning to do, has to be able to sustain it. And And another challenge, which I think is critical, is developing a message that resonates with people and making sure you find an effective way of communicating that message. Another challenge I would say is to be able to deal with what comes at you, because a lot comes at you at a campaign. So you have to be nimble, you have to react quickly and strategically. You have to be able to pull that team that you develop together and come to a conclusion with them about how the quickest way to react. Another challenge is money. I think fundraising, like war, is hell, but you got to do it. And money, of course, is critical to a campaign. And another challenge is taking advantage of the latest technology, because, you know, social media wasn't around when I was doing campaigns, but it sure is important now. So all of those things I would say are challenges.
Thanks,
Right.
Mr. Cannon.
Sure.
Ms. St. Fleur, could you build on that a little bit and maybe mention what you found to make for a successful campaign?
Well, for me, as a first-time candidate, and I was very lucky, I came off, I was working for Scott Harshbarger when I decided I wanted to run for office. Scott has just come off his run. He'd been very much involved in his race for governor at the time. And I saw what it took to really do the retail. I love the retail politics part of it. I mean, I love the knocking on doors, connecting with people. And that actually what interested me and drove me to step forward and come forward. What I find important as a candidate was that I had to know my why. Because one of the things I always think about running for office as a litigator, when I was particularly as an assistant DA, I've done all I can, and you rest. When you rest, it's done. And so then the jury comes back and you stand up and you've done all you can. And so you need to be comfortable with the fact that you've put all that you could on and left it there and did all that you can, and you're ready to take whatever comes. Because I think one of the things people romanticize sometimes running for office, and we get really focused on what the possibilities are, and don't often help candidates understand how to deal with the challenges that will come, the challenges of family, the challenges of building the appropriate network, the challenges of raising funds, and the challenges of really identifying your message, because you can't be everywhere. And so you really need to figure out what it is that you're going to drive. And so for me, one, I had the examples of many people that I had worked for in campaigns and had an idea of what I was looking for. So when I decided to start, I sat down with my core team of people so that I can understand what they thought. I knew what I wanted to do, but I needed to know whether or not what they thought my capacity was to be able to achieve it, right? And so you needed a network. You really do need a strong network of people that you're going to be, I always call them ambassadors or allies, however you call them, because those folks you're going to be able to deploy on your behalf, and that's really important. And that's where you begin to hone that message, your why. Because if you can't convey your why to them, then how do you do that to the broader audience that you're going to go after? And the second piece is that you really need to be able to raise the funds. And as a woman of color, I have to tell you, it's one of the toughest things that you have to do. And you're not used to asking. And so, and then getting away from the idea that you're not asking for yourself personally. It's like when you're asking in order to move an agenda. And it's tough to make that shift. So I think that's an important piece that you have to do. The plan is absolutely important, as Dennis has said, and then being able to have a team. But you also have to have that core team that's going to be able to tell you the truth. One of the things that happens when you become a candidate, you become larger than life, even to people who knows you every day, and they don't want to be able to, and you're a strong character. If you're not a strong character, you're not doing this. And so people are afraid to approach you to tell you when you mess up. You need to be able to hear the good, and you have to be open to that, because that's where growth comes in, and be able to understand that your candidacy is going to shift as you grow during the campaign. So I think those are the things that I would say: know who you are, understand your why, have that network of folks that are going to be that core team for you, and be there for you when it's dark and be there for you in the light. Being able to raise the money and be and have a really efficient plan. I think those are the things that were most important for me. And then at the end of the day, pull on the things that you've done. One of the things that actually really was helpful to me, I was president of the Mass Black Lawyers Association. I was part of my CYO. You know, I had a group of, you had community before you stepped into the race. And so you have to think about, who was that community? Who was that larger community, you know, that was part of, who was your church community at the time? Who were those folks? Because you need to sort of really lay down where your first group of support is going to come from beyond your immediate network. And I think being able to think about that and how you draw on that and not leave people aside. One of the things I found in the first race, people who were hurt because you didn't reach out, because you didn't think about it. And sometimes you lose people that you've known for a very long time because you didn't pick up and make that call. And so it's really important that you really think about your circle of influence beyond that immediate core network, and then work that circle out beyond yourself into your career network.
Thank you, Ms. St. Fleur. Mr. Grossman, we've heard a lot about the money that's necessary in order to run a campaign. Could you talk a little bit about why it costs so much to run a campaign and how one raises the funds in order to do that?
Of course, different campaigns have different challenges. And I remember in 1992, when I was co-chairman of the Massachusetts delegation to the Democratic National Convention, and I was asked, would I appear on a frontline TV expose, which was called The Best $400 Million That Money Can Buy in Politics, or how $400 million was spent in the 1992 race. That's the total amount of money that was spent in 1992. This year, my guess is that number will cross the $10 billion mark. Things have changed a lot, and not necessarily for the good. There are two defining events during the past 20 years that have changed almost everything when it comes to fundraising for political campaigns. One of them, I believe, was the Howard Dean campaign, when Howard Dean, the former governor of Vermont, ran for president in 2004, and to some extent perfected the art of online fundraising. It was the first campaign that raised vast amounts of money. Up until that time, it was all about your Rolodex or your database, and you'd pick up the phone and call as many people as you can and ask them for money, or you'd ask people to call their friends and ask for money, and the money was all raised very much personally. The internet changed everything. Howard Dean raised almost all of the $50 million he raised in 2004 using the internet. That changed everything only 16 years ago. And second, it was a decision by the United States Supreme Court in 2010 called Citizens United against the Federal Election Commission, and there were other decisions made that year. That changed everything as well, because that opened the floodgates of a virtually unlimited torrent of what is often referred to as dark money that has created the political equivalent of a nuclear arms race in American politics. And much of that money, even though the rules have changed, can be hidden from view. People don't know who's given the money, and that is a bad development. I don't mind having money spent by people in politics, but I want the money to be fully disclosed as to who has spent it. I happen to believe we should pass a constitutional amendment and get rid of Citizens United, because for corporations to be able to spend unlimited amounts of money is not a good thing for democracy. Candidates once believed, by the way, political action committees or super PACs have become a huge factor in politics. I read recently that a person we know who's a Bostonian just gave $75 million to a super PAC supporting Donald Trump. You can do that. You can give an unlimited amount of money to a super PAC as long as it's disclosed. I think that's a bad development. I think we should have passed public financing of campaigns. I regret Citizens United decision, and I hope we can pass a constitutional amendment to get back to some more appropriate way of doing our politics. The vast majority of campaigns for board of selectmen, for state representative, for state senator, are done the old-fashioned way. The candidate gets on the phone and dials relentlessly for dollars, setting up all kinds of fundraising events and building relationships and using those relationships to raise money. That's how it's done in most cases for lower level races. When it gets to Senate races and presidential races, the torrent of money that's been poured into these races because of super PACs and because of unlimited campaign contributions has perverted democracy in many ways. But ironically, it's been organizations like Act Blue and the fact that most presidential candidates now proudly talk about how their average contribution was $64 or $52 or $23 that has changed American politics. It has invited individuals, citizens back into politics because they can now give small amounts of money, which in the aggregate can fund campaigns. It's one of the main reasons why I think Joe Biden has been able to have such a tremendous advantage, because the money that has poured into his campaign through the internet, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, have created a level playing field, and even more than a level playing field. Dramatic changes, but let's pass a constitutional amendment, get rid of Citizens United, and get back to something that is more akin to what the democracy was that I believe so deeply in.
Thanks, Mr. Grossman. Mr. Cannon, can we go back to you? You talked about your early activism, and I wonder if you could offer some advice to the boys of the school, indicating how they might get involved in campaigns.
Absolutely. I would say, first of all, that campaigns are desperate for volunteers. They need you as much as you might think you need them. So I would definitely, if you're interested, take advantage of the opportunity to do that. You can walk into headquarters. You don't have to have someone call on your behalf, but if you've got someone to call on your behalf, that's great too. But campaigns are looking for people to go door to door, to give out leaflets, to call people and identify supporters so that they can turn them out on election day, to hold signs. I did a lot of those things in my Roxbury Latin years and in my college years. So there's no magic to it, and there's no requirement that you have to pass. People are looking for your help. So absolutely. There are also opportunities sometimes to play, particularly in college, which many of you will be going to. Can't guarantee everybody. You could get, a position as a volunteer, a deputy press person, a deputy scheduler, whatever, or maybe more. I know college kids who've been social media directors. They got paid for it, who got paid for being part of the fundraising operation. So if you're interested, there are opportunities. Take advantage of them. So
Thanks. Ms. St. Fleur, you've not only been an active candidate, but you're a keen observer of politics on all levels. Could you talk a little bit about what you think has been different about Joe Biden's approach to running this campaign as opposed to Hillary Clinton's?
One of the things that for me anyway, as I've watched it, I've actually worked on Bill Clinton's campaign because I was deployed to Florida, in Gore's campaign, and Hillary Clinton's campaign, the first time she ran. One of the things that impressed me about Biden is running an all 50 state campaign. I mean, that has not happened for us in a very long time. With the with redistricting and this idea that we all just talk to our people, I mean, that's been encouraged by our legislators, unfortunately, because redistricting has actually helped create some of the tribalism that we see, I believe, in our country today. So what I think Biden has done is trying to overcome that and is reaching out and talking to everyone. I don't think Hillary Clinton did that as much when she last ran. The second piece that I find that Biden is more personable. I mean, the everyday person can connect with him in a different way than they connected with Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton is very, she's brilliant. She really is. I mean, she knows policy and she speaks from that space, that policy space. But if I'm a mom trying to figure out how I'm going to put food on the table, if I have a sick child and trying to figure out how I'm going, that I need a person who gets that. And I think what I find is the empathy that everybody talks about with Biden, but he actually understands the life, and he's stayed connected to the life of the everyday person. And he's able to connect with them in a way that I don't think that Hillary Clinton was able to do. The other thing is believability. After over 40 years in office, they still, somehow, Biden has managed to maintain his credibility. So they've seen him in action. They've had a chance every, as a senator, every 6 years or to really go through his record for all these many years. And he has always been able, he's run for vice president, and they've been able to somehow, he's been able to maintain his credibility. They trust him. And that is what I think was missing with, unfortunately. And I was so angry with when Hillary Clinton didn't win the first time. I got to tell you, as a woman who was excited to have a woman on the ballot, but that's part of the challenge. They did the credibility, the trust, the connection on an everyday basis. And I have to say, just as there are barriers for people of color running, I think there are barriers for women running for office in the United States that we're still driving to overcome. And I think she had that as part of the challenges as well. But I don't think she ran a good campaign last time around. That's just my own personal opinion, and I believe that Biden has learned from that, and is making certain that his team is on the ground and talking to everybody. And the other thing that we didn't do, you could talk to Black folks, but you also have to talk to the Latino community. You have to talk to the poor white community. There's a huge population of white folks who are living in poverty in the United States. And the Democratic Party has stopped talking to them. I do a lot of work in Alabama and Ohio. And I think this time around, the conversation's happening on the ground. So we're talking to all Americans. And that I don't think this last Clinton campaign accomplished as well.
Thank you. We've learned a lot already. I think it's time to take a couple of questions from the boys, if they are there. Mrs. Berg, could you come back on and referee those? And let's give about 5 minutes to these questions.
Right. One question here. Have the campaign costs and the increase in campaign costs affected the diversity of the candidates running for office, in your opinion?
I think we've had, go ahead, Marie.
No, I was going to say, honestly, because of Act Blue and those electronic opportunities that are now available for folks to fund GoFundMe and all of that, I think it's made it more accessible for the person who's got the $15 to $20 to actually support communities of color. I actually think that Obama actually started that, honestly, about really building a profile to be able to get the small donor to contribute. I've actually seen more diversity, and look at Boston. I mean, I've seen more diversity in campaigning right now than I've seen in 30, almost 40 years that I've been involved in this work right now. So I do believe that despite, you know, the current federal posture, that at the local races that we're actually seeing more diversity.
Actually, I think the Senate candidate this year who's raised the most money is Jamie Harrison, who's running for senator in South Carolina.
Yeah.
Who's African American.
Yeah, it was it. And one take,
And
he
I-
had 58 million. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
And just look, inexorably as this country, I mean, this United States will be a majority minority country within the next 20 to 22, 23 years. And the electorate is changing dramatically. And to the extent that the electorate is changing and is voting to a greater extent, I mean, if you think about what happened when Ayanna Pressley became a member of Congress and defeated an incumbent Congressman, Michael Capuano, that was because there was a huge outpouring of diverse voters in that district, and many of them were first-time voters. She inspired them.
That's right.
She was able to raise the money, and she was able to succeed. And I think that is happening to a greater and greater extent all over this country at every level of American politics. Ethnic, racial diversity is an asset because the electorate is changing so dramatically and demanding a diversity of points of view that speak directly to the needs and concerns of voters who sit around those kitchen tables and worry about making it to the 30th of every month.
Thank you all very much. The next question here is, how significant would you say that debates are in a successful campaign, to the extent that they exist for like presidential campaigns?
I think they're very significant. I think the 1960 presidential debate between Nixon and John Kennedy, I think was why John Kennedy won the election. Because in that first debate that they had, Nixon looked sweaty and and Kennedy looked cool and calm, and he gave people confidence that he, whom they didn't know as well, could be president. The George W. Bush, looking at his watch to see what time it was for people when he ran for president in 1992 against Bill Clinton and Ross Perot. People got the sense that he really didn't care that much about them, that it wasn't important enough to focus on his debate. I think that probably was unfair, but I think it hurt him very badly. And I do actually think that the third debate between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump hurt her for reasons that most people don't talk about. Because she was asked a question about late-term abortion, and she came across as defending it. And I think for a lot of people who were supportive of her initially or thought they might vote for her, but had, mixed feelings about abortion, but strong feelings about late-term abortion, I think that probably hurt. It wasn't something people discussed afterwards. But if you look particularly among white Catholic voters, it showed that she had a dip in her polling average. Now, it mattered. She still won the popular vote, but it mattered in Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin, which she lost by very small margins. And she also kept saying, all he talks about is tax cuts, tax cuts. And I was thinking, boy, is she campaigning for him or herself? So I think debates matter hugely.
Just one final comment, it'd take 20 seconds, and just go back just a few weeks. I'm not going to predict what's going to happen on Tuesday because we're all paranoid as Democrats and we are not going to believe it until we see it. But I think the performance that Donald Trump gave in the first debate, I think that will be looked back upon years from now, if he loses, to be the moment when the bottom fell out of his campaign. That was an extraordinarily important moment seen by 75 million Americans.
I have one final question here that we're going to ask. And the question is, it's from an 8th grader. And the question is, what do you think is an appropriate way to go about walking this political divide in our country right now? So sort of in line with that, what can we do as political activists and workers within the government to help heal that partisan divide, even as we are sort of maybe supporting individual candidates? That's a hard question,
Now,
but an important one.
I think it's relate to each other as human beings, or create space for dialogue. I mean, because attack the issue, not the individual. I think Biden's been saying that, and we haven't been hearing that enough. I can disagree with you, but not think you're a horrible person. And I think that we've now just really, connected the issue with the individual and just integrated them in a way that we can have sane conversations. And I think for democracy to work, we have to create a space for us to be able to disagree with each other, but understand that we agree with the tenets that we love this democracy. So even with each other, as you young men engage in debate, because model it for some of your families, because this election cycle has created some real divisions. And so we really need, even in the family, to be able to create space for conversations to happen. I think we talk about conversations on race, but I think that, and I think they're important, but we need to think about conversations about our democracy. What is our democracy truly today, this iteration of our democracy, as we are now all in our various little rooms, Zoom rooms, hearing from people that we know and love, and not necessarily hearing from cross-sector of ideas. I mean, that's what college was supposed to be about, that place where you get the opportunity to experience ideas from across the various spectrum. And so we need to create those spaces. And I actually believe I can love you and not agree with you. And so we have to get back to that space again. And for the young men, I do want to say, each of you understand, every 2 years there's an election in Massachusetts. We're never short of election. So you go ahead and volunteer. Educate yourself about the issues. Read beyond what you read in our regular textbooks, because there's a large history about Americans that's not often shared with us. And so make sure, because as the world is changing, we need to have a better and more comprehensive understanding of each other, so that you understand why the angst, why people are afraid, why they're feeling that there's not space for them in this country. And to understand that, we need to have a broader understanding of our collective history. So understand that collective history could create space for communication and start it in our own lives.
Well, Marie, I think you ended it on a great note. We can disagree agreeably, number one, but we need a leader who can help us heal. Every organization, every institution needs a healing presence at the moment, more than almost anything else. And that's the great task ahead of us after November 3rd.
And I would say the other task, and I think it's, by the way, a great question. The other task is for Democrats to realize, as individuals, because I talk to a lot of Democrats who can't talk to Republicans anymore. And I'm sure that the opposite is true as well. Republicans who refuse to talk to Democrats. The Republican you're not talking to is just someone who thinks differently than you, who looks at a question differently than you. And actually, when you talk about it, you may find some commonality on those issues, but they're just human beings who think differently. And it just boggles my mind why people won't talk to people of the opposing party, who can't go to dinner with them, can't talk to them, can't associate with them. This is a really serious problem in this country, very serious. This kind of polarization, I don't think we've seen this kind of polarization since the Civil War. And I think Marie said it beautifully. You just have to realize it's another human being.
Thank you all so much. And that seemed a good place for us to end this portion of the segment. We are going to continue on here to hear a little bit more from you, Mr. Cannon, with the help of your assistant, Katie here, who's shown up thankfully for
It was
us.
on the screen.
I would jump in too, simply to say thank you to Mr. Grossman and Ms. St. Fleur. You've really helped us to understand what the process is all about and how all of us might get involved in it. We're going to make this segue now, as you kids would say. We're going to pivot to a presentation by Mr. Cannon. We've been blessed with these presentations, even before my headmastership. Mr. Cannon would come back like the swallows to Capistrano every 4 years in order to tell us what we should be looking for on election night and to imagine the way in which the races were going to in fact come to a conclusion. And we're blessed today, Dennis, no pressure, to hear you once again tell us, even in this strange environment in which probably not much will be known on election night, nonetheless, what we should look for. Thank you.
Happy to do it. Thank you, Carrie, for that segue. So hold on 1 second. Getting a little help from someone else here.
So Dennis, just so that you know what we are seeing right now is the first panel of the slide presentation.
Right. Okay. That's great. Thank you. By the way, I don't know what I would have done in terms of preparing for this without Ms. Berg's help. So thank you very much. And now I can't move this over here. Okay. So let's start at this beginning. So this is the 6th time I've had the opportunity to speak to RL students about the presidential election. In 2000, I predicted that for the first time in 112 years, there was a chance that the winner of the popular vote for president would lose in the Electoral College. And of course he did. That was the Bush v. Gore race, in which Gore won the popular vote by 500,000 votes, and Bush won the Electoral College by 537 votes in Florida and by 1 vote in the Supreme Court, which you all learned about in one of your recent halls. If only I had made the same far out prediction 4 years ago, I'd be a genius. Today, I'm going to tell you what to watch for on election night, but before we focus on the big race, let's remember that there's more than just the presidency at stake. There's the US House of Representatives, where Democrats hold a 35 vote margin and look likely to hold on and possibly improve on that lead. And there's the crucial battle for control of the US Senate, where Republicans narrowly outnumber Democrats 53 to 47, and 1/3 of the seats are up for grabs. To take back the Senate, Democrats need to gain 4 seats unless the Biden-Harris ticket wins. Then they'll only need 3 seats because Vice President Harris, as president of the Senate, would break the tie and give them a 51st vote. We'll soon know if Mitch McConnell's days as Senate Majority Leader are numbered. Not only is this the strangest presidential election I can remember, and I've been around for a while, but as you've heard Mr. Brennan rightly say, the most consequential. I'm also willing to bet that this is one campaign all of you know well, a campaign dominated by the coronavirus, a shattered economy, and the issue of racial justice. Most of all, it's been a referendum on Donald Trump. If not for the pandemic, there's a good chance that President Trump, even though his approval rating has never cracked 45%, would have won re-election on the claim of a strong economy. But the pandemic upended all that, and the administration's erratic handling of it has turned out to be Joe Biden's trump card. That's not to say that Trump could not still pull off another miracle. Polls in almost every battleground state show Trump behind, yet in most of them, Biden's lead is only in the mid-single digits, not too different from the single-digit polling leads that Hillary Clinton enjoyed in the polls of those states 4 years ago. That's why Democrats are holding their breath, still suffering the effects of PTSD brought on by the political cyclone that hit on election night 2016. Now to my map, which is based on recent state-by-state polls, as well as on past voting patterns and the demographics of each state. This map represents my best guess. Others may disagree, but they're wrong. Just kidding. As you all know by now, each of the candidates needs at least 270 electoral votes out of 538 to win the presidency, and that the winner of each state's popular vote is awarded all of that state's electoral votes with 2 exceptions, Nebraska and Maine. Those 2 states allocate 2 electoral votes to the winner of the state's popular vote and 1 electoral vote each to the winner of each of the state's congressional districts. That may have significance this year. Here we have Biden with 222 almost certain electoral votes in 18 blue states, plus the District of Columbia, and Trump with 125 electoral votes in 20 red states. The other 12 states in beige, plus 2 congressional districts, 1 in Maine and 1 in Nebraska, have a total of 191 electoral votes and could go either way. These are the 12 states, plus those 2 congressional districts, that I believe are in play this year. If I'm right, Biden needs to pick up just 48 electoral votes from those 14 battlegrounds to get to 270. Trump needs 145. Biden's easiest victory, which I predict he will do, and capture the 3 states that Clinton lost by less than 1% 4 years ago. Michigan with 16 electoral votes, which Clinton lost by 11,000 votes out of 5 million. Wisconsin with 10 electoral votes, where she lost by 22,000 votes out of 3 million. And Pennsylvania with 20 electoral votes, where she lost by just 44,000 out of over 6 million. That would give Biden 272 electoral votes. The other battlegrounds his campaign is focused on winning, just in case one of the 3 Great Lakes states don't come through, are Nevada, Arizona, Florida, North Carolina, and Nebraska's 2nd congressional district based in Omaha. Suppose Biden loses Pennsylvania and the Great Lakes scenario, but picks up Nevada, Arizona, and that 1 electoral vote from Nebraska's 2nd district. He would be at exactly 270. And that's a scenario I don't think is out of whack. It could happen. That's why these 9 battlegrounds are the critical ones for both campaigns. For Biden to pick up those 48 electoral votes, he needs to get to 270, and for Trump to block him. The other 5 battlegrounds, Georgia, Ohio, Iowa, and Texas, and Maine's second congressional district, are long shots for Biden. They would be nice to have, but they are probably not critical to his getting to 270. Therefore, both his campaign and Trump's will allocate fewer resources to these 5. And they will allocate almost no resources at all to the 36 states that are not battlegrounds, because they already know the outcomes in those states, like Massachusetts. And that would be a waste of their time and money. And the reason you're seeing ads for both presidential candidates on your Boston TV is because those ads are trying to reach folks in New Hampshire, which has only 4 electoral votes. The good news for Trump is that with the exception of Nevada and New Hampshire, he won every single battleground 4 years ago. The bad news is that he's now running behind or even in the polls in almost all of them. He's hoping that there are 5 factors, there they are, that public opinion polls aren't accounting for. Republican success in registering new white voters without a college degree, a group that supports him, by the way, overwhelmingly in battleground states. Millions of so-called hidden or shy Trump voters embarrassed to tell pollsters they're for the president. The rejection of hundreds of thousands of Democratic mail-in ballots that aren't filled out properly or arrive too late. Voter suppression measures that more often impact people of color, and typically low turnout on the part of young voters who, if they did vote, would go 2-1 for Biden. If none of that works, Trump has a backup strategy, one he's been signaling for months. Claim victory on election night, sow confusion and chaos, more on that later, with the ultimate goal of pushing this issue, that issue, to the Supreme Court, where he's appointed 1/3 of the justices and where he's confident of 5 of the 9 votes. So what happens if Biden and Trump are tied at the end of the count at 269-269? The election of the next president would be decided in the House of Representatives, where each state gets 1 vote. California, with almost 40 million people, gets the same number of votes as Vermont with 600,000. Currently, Democrats control the House, but 26 state delegations are majority Republican, 23 are majority Democrat, and 1 is tied. However, it will be the new House, elected in 5 days, that will make that decision. What if the new House is split 25-25 and they're deadlocked on the election of the president? Under our Constitution, if no candidate gets 270 electoral votes, it's the Senate that chooses the vice president. So either Harris or Pence will be voted in as vice president by the newly elected Senate. And if the House continues to be deadlocked by January 20th, when a new president must be sworn in, the new vice president will assume the office of president. Here's another one. Suppose the new Senate is split 50-50, which is very possible. Then the sitting vice president, as president of the Senate, Mike Pence, would break the tie in his own favor and become president. Here's one final scenario to consider if there's a tie in the Electoral College. Suppose the newly elected House has more Republican delegations, but the Democrats control the Senate. Meet the next president and vice president. Next Tuesday, a few of you will cast your first vote for president, and all of you will have the chance to see history in the making. 5 nights from now, the network and cable news anchors and a bunch of online sources will start reporting the state-by-state results. And you will want that scorecard that I've dropped in the chat and that was emailed to you by the school to keep track of that. A big question is when we'll start to know who's winning. That could be tough to predict this year for a number of reasons. Most Republicans, urged on by the president, have either voted early in person or will do so on election day in person. Most Democrats, spooked by COVID-19, have mailed in their ballots, although many of them also voted early in person, as you could see by those long lines. Each state has its own rules for how long they'll accept the expected flood of mail-in ballots and when they will start counting them. Be aware, though, that the Supreme Court can still change these rules, as it did only 2 days ago when it ruled that Wisconsin could not accept mail-in ballots after Election Day. That means that thanks to slow mail service, tens and perhaps hundreds of thousands of ballots in the very important state of Wisconsin that are postmarked on or before November 3rd, but arrive after that, will be dumped in the garbage. Some states won't start counting mail ballots until Election Day, so don't expect to see anything close to final results from those states until well after election night. However, the results of some key states that do count mail-in ballots as they are received by election officials, often weeks earlier than Election Day, right now, should give us an indication on election night of where this is headed. So let's Fast forward to Tuesday night at 6 p.m. our time. At that moment, polling places will have closed in most of Indiana and Kentucky. And within seconds, before any actual votes are counted and based on their exit polls, the networks and cables will try to project the winner in those reliably Republican states. At 6 p.m. or 6:30, Trump will be ahead, 19 electoral votes to 0. Shortly after 7 p.m., it starts to get exciting. Results from 5 more states will trickle in, including the swing states of Georgia with 16 electoral votes and Florida with 29 and New Hampshire with 4. So by around 7:30 to 8, we should be getting early returns from Florida. This, the nation's third most populous state, a unique mix of the North, the South, and the Caribbean, is along with Pennsylvania the prize that Biden and Trump covet most. Clinton lost it very narrowly to Trump, who has made the state his home. You've heard from time to time about the gender gap, with Biden leading among women and Trump leading among men. One big question in Florida and every battleground state is whether more women will vote than men. Florida also has a large elderly population, and that appears to be shifting away from its previous support of the president because of a pandemic that threatens to kill them. That shift could be what makes the difference in Florida 5 days from now. Florida requires that all mail-in ballots be received by Election Day, and it has been counting its mail-in ballots as they come in for the last 3 weeks. So we will start to get numbers out of Florida. Keep in mind that it will be reporting those early mail-in ballots first. So Biden should take an early lead in those Florida returns, and then it will tighten as the night goes on. If Trump does not win Florida, it's hard to see his path to victory. Georgia, along with such other Sunbelt states as Texas, North Carolina, Arizona, and Florida, has been gradually moving away from its allegiance to the Republican Party. We have a slide that shows that. In the last 10 presidential elections, those 5 states collectively have voted for the Democratic candidate 7 times and the Republican candidate 43 times. But all of them are changing thanks to ever-growing populations of color, increasing numbers of college-educated white voters from elsewhere in the country, and expanding suburbs. If this trend continues and Democrats come to dominate the fast-growing states of the Sun Belt in presidential races, the Republicans may reconsider their current love affair with the Electoral College. In Georgia, Biden is relying on overwhelmingly Democratic Black voters who account for 1/3 of the state's electorate and white college-educated voters in the Atlanta suburbs to help him pull off an upset. But a recent poll showed Trump leading among Georgia's white voters without a college degree by a whopping 76 to 18%. Georgia requires mail-in ballots to be in by Election Day. It doesn't start counting until then. So it'll take a while to get numbers from Georgia. If Biden wins the Peach State, it's all over. New Hampshire is the most conservative state in New England, but it went Democratic in each of the last 4 presidential elections. Clinton carried it by less than 3,000 votes. If Al Gore had won it in 2000, its 4 electoral votes would have made him President Gore. New Hampshire requires mail-in ballots to be in by Election Day, and they're counted on that day. So we should get returns from New Hampshire fairly early in the evening. And again, I predict Biden will carry that state. At 7:30, polls close in 3 states, including the battlegrounds of Ohio and North Carolina. Obama managed to win North Carolina in 2008, but he lost it in 2012 and Clinton lost it in 2016. North Carolina, as I said, is fast changing. 20% African-American, growing college-educated population, less racially polarized than most other southern states. All good news for the Democrats. This is another state that Trump probably needs to win if he's going to get to 270. North Carolina will accept mail-in ballots until November 12th, but it has been counting mail-in ballots as they come in. So this should be another state where we start to get some early meaningful numbers. There is no probably about Ohio. Trump must win Ohio. 4 years ago, I said, watch this closely. It will be a cliffhanger. It wasn't. Trump won it by 8 points. With its crucial 18 electoral votes, Ohio has become a bellwether state, meaning, as you heard earlier, it almost always goes for the winner. And since 1964, Ohio has always gone for the winner of the electoral vote. Ohio is at the center of the Rust Belt, the old industrial heartland of the Northeast and Great Lakes, where factories have aged, manufacturing has moved elsewhere, and smaller urban areas are in decline. It has a large non-college educated white population, and it has trended Republican in recent years. But polls indicate that Biden has a shot here. Ohio accepts mail-in ballots until November 13th. This has been counting them as it receives them. It plans to report initial results around 7:30 in the evening, and it will not report any further votes until all of them have been counted. Maybe this time it will be a cliffhanger. No, really. At 8 o'clock, results will start coming in from 17 more states, including the blue-collar, traditionally Democratic Rust Belt stronghold of Pennsylvania, with 20 electoral votes. This year, all eyes are on Pennsylvania. No Democrat has won the White House in the last 60 years without carrying Pennsylvania. This is Biden's birthplace. And as a son of a Catholic working family, he's made a strong pitch to non-college educated, blue-collar workers in the central part of the state, many of them Catholic, that he is one of them and has urged them to return to the Democratic Party. If he can chip away at Trump's big 2016 margin among these voters while building a large enough lead in metropolitan Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, he'll win this most important state. Biden's pledge in the third debate to phase out fossil fuels has given some last-minute energy to the Trump campaign in a state where oil, natural gas, and fracking account for over 100,000 jobs. The Trump campaign has been busy registering white voters without a college degree in impressive numbers and working hard to suppress the urban vote by sending in 1,600 monitors to ballot drop boxes in Philadelphia to videotape voters and make sure that everyone who votes early in person in that Democratic stronghold knows they are being carefully watched and may be challenged, a not very subtle form of voter intimidation. Pennsylvania is a state that Trump hopes to win even if he loses it. Indeed, he hopes Pennsylvania, along with a few other battleground states, will catapult him to the presidency, no matter the actual outcome. Here's how. The state is currently under a court order to accept mail-in ballots until November 6th. It won't start counting the flood of mail-in ballots until Election Day itself. So the first returns, let me just grab this. Where'd that go? There it is. The first returns, that are reported on election night will probably show Trump leading in Pennsylvania and a number of other close states, because those who voted in person, predominantly Republican, on election day get their votes counted first in those states and reported first. So this is the red mirage you heard about earlier. With an election night lead, Trump declares victory. In order to stay ahead in the count, Trump's campaign challenges the long processing and count of millions of mail-in ballots in Pennsylvania and some other battleground states that favor Democrats, the so-called blue shift, filing legal appeals all the way, it hopes, to the Supreme Court. Some are concerned that the Supreme Court has become just as partisan an institution as the Congress and the White House. And just last night, 3 Supreme Court justices indicated they would consider taking such a case from Republicans in Pennsylvania after the election. Another scenario that keeps Democrats up at night is one where Pennsylvania's Republican-controlled legislature declares that the counting of the mail-ins has become too unreliable and that they have to proceed with the results from November 3rd, when Trump was ahead, and submit a slate of Trump electors to the Congress without waiting for the final actual count of who wins the state. At that point, the Democratic governor could certify a competing slate of electors for Biden. There are a bunch of political science professors who are stumped about what happens next. Pennsylvania, home of the Constitutional Convention, could become the center of a constitutional crisis. Just think, if we chose our president through a national popular vote, there would be no opportunity for anyone to manipulate the system. Polls close in a bunch of states at 9 p.m. our time, and one of those is Arizona with 11 electoral votes. Like Florida, Arizona does not accept mail-in ballots after Election Day and it counts them as they come in. So we can expect to get meaningful numbers from Arizona that night. Arizona has voted for a Democrat for president since 1940, has not voted for a Democrat for president since 1948. That's once that they voted for a Democrat out of the last 17 elections. But if Biden wins here on Tuesday, he will have been propelled by a coalition of Latinx who favor Biden over Trump by 2-1, and urban and suburban women, younger voters, California expatriates, Asian Americans, and Native Americans who are reshaping the politics of what is the fastest growing state in the nation. The Biden campaign feels Arizona, of all places, may well be part of its insurance policy in case one of the Great Lakes states slips away. So let's pause this here a second and consider this. Sometime between 10 and 11, we should have a pretty good handle on the results from Florida, Arizona, and North Carolina. If at that point, Steve Kornacki on MSNBC or John King on CNN or Bill Hemmer at Fox are showing the president headed for victory in all 3 states, you can count on one of those Pennsylvania scenarios taking place, unless, of course, Trump wins outright. If, on the other hand, Biden is winning Florida or both Arizona and North Carolina, or some combination of 2 of those, he will be very hard to stop. Polls in Michigan and Wisconsin close at 9. Biden seems to be comfortably ahead in Michigan with a major push to turn out the African-American community excited about Kamala Harris's presence on the ticket. African-Americans right now seem to be going 9-1 for Biden over Trump. 2012, Barack Obama swept Wayne County, where Detroit is located, by 382,000 votes. 4 years later, Hillary Clinton carried it by almost 100,000 fewer votes. You can see why she lost the state, even if only by 11,000, when everyone expected her to win. Michigan requires all mail-in votes in by Election Day, but won't start counting them until that day, and is not planning to release results until all votes are counted. So in Michigan, if they stick to that, there will be no red mirage because nobody will know who's ahead at any point till all the votes are in. That has particular significance, and the Secretary of State in Michigan is a Democrat. Wisconsin is tough to predict. Before 2016, it had gone Democratic in the previous 7 presidential elections, but that's only half the story. It's always been a closely divided state. In 2000, it went for Gore over Bush by 5,000 votes, for Kerry over Bush by 11,000, for Trump by just 22,000. Milwaukee and Madison are Democratic strongholds. Almost all of the rest of the state leans Republican. Polls say Biden wins it, but it could be close, especially after the Supreme Court decision that I mentioned earlier. Wisconsin doesn't start counting mail-in ballots until Election Day. So as with Pennsylvania, Trump may be ahead here on election night with no final count for a few days. Some Texas polls close at 9, others at 10. In some counties there have been counting early in-person votes and mail-in ballots, which by the way are limited to the disabled and voters over 65. They'll be counting them as they're received, so we may start to get some results early. I never expected to include Texas as a battleground state, but Texas has been changing. And according to public opinion polls, the race is actually tight. Only 2 years ago, Beto O'Rourke came within 2 percentage points of unseating Senator Ted Cruz. And Texas seems to be getting a little more Democratic each year. It has 38 electoral votes, so that's a Texas-sized prize. And even if a Democratic victory doesn't materialize this year after Biden's stumble on fossil fuels, it's on a trajectory to do so in the near future. Polls notwithstanding, Trump won here by 9 points 4 years ago, so it's a long shot. If Biden carries Texas, Trump is toast. Two other battlegrounds that are closing at 10 p.m. our time are Nevada and Iowa. Both have 6 electoral votes. Both will have results to report on election night. Nevada was Hillary Clinton's second narrowest victory 4 years ago after New Hampshire, and Trump has been trying to steal this one from the Democrats. The state's tourism industry has been hard hit by COVID-19, and despite the presence of Trump's hotel in Las Vegas, Nevada seems to be trending blue. Most people assume Iowa is a Republican state, but before 2016, it had gone Democratic in 6 of the previous 7 elections. Iowa took a hard rightward turn 4 years ago, giving the president almost a 10-point victory over Clinton. Since then, Iowa agriculture has been hard hit by Trump's tariff wars and the coronavirus. Farmers worry, though, about Biden's tax proposals and his commitment to environmental regulation. Iowa has the highest percentage of non-college educated white voters of any battleground, but polls do show it's close. At 11 p.m. our time, polling closes on the West Coast, sometimes called the left coast, and Hawaii. These 4 blue states, including the big electoral enchilada, California, should award Biden a Western bonanza of 78 electoral votes. Tuesday, we cast ballots in the 59th election for President of the United States, the oldest democracy in continuous existence in the world. We take that for granted, but when you look at the history of other nations, it's remarkable. It's the exception to the rule. Even in the midst of the Civil War in 1864, when the North was torn apart by strife, and it seemed as if Lincoln might be defeated for re-election and the Union left leaderless, that year's presidential election went on as scheduled. Lincoln wrote, "We cannot have free government without elections. And if the rebellion could force us to forego or postpone a national election, it might fairly claim to have already conquered and ruined us." We have profound differences in this country over policy and values. But unlike in so many other nations throughout history, the one thing we all hopefully agree on is that we don't settle those differences through violence and bloodshed. We settled them at the ballot box. So when you watch the returns come in Tuesday night, remember that from Washington and Lincoln to Joe Biden and Donald Trump, we are linked through over 231 years of history by what is, as much as anything, the trademark of America, our unbroken tradition of holding free elections. And that's it.
Mr. Cannon, thank you very much. We are very fortunate to have you with us. It took a lot of work in order to get all that together, and we are much the wiser for it. We could watch MSNBC or CNN or Fox News all night long, and many of us do that. But nobody is wiser than you. You are the wisest pundit in continuous existence, I would say, and we are so grateful that you would come back to us each 4 years. Who knows what 2024 holds for any of us, but we are much wiser in 2020. So I thank you for that.
Nominee. Trump will be the Republican nominee.
Watch, yeah. Well, in any case, you've made election night much more interesting for us, and we're grateful for that.
Thank
Boys,
you.
I would suggest that we take a 10-minute break, And then we reconvene at the address that was given to you in order to hear about our own straw ballots and what that outcome is, and then to get, of course, the much anticipated finals of Kahoot. Thank you very much.